We're here in Bangsa South, bro.
We're here in Bangsa South, bro. Make sure to like and subscribe.
Hit that like button.
Everyone, we're here right now back on Pathways to Excellence, where we showcase the incredible talent that is present within this country right here. And yeah, so we have with us here Mr. Muiz Zafri. Maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit.
Okay. Hi everyone. I'm Muiz Zafri. People just usually call me Muiz. Currently a rising sophomore at the University of California, Berkeley. I'm studying economics, hopefully doing a double major in data science as well.
Economics and data science.
Yeah.
At UC Berkeley.
Yeah.
Wow, amazing. Maybe you can share a little bit about your academic background and what eventually brought you to UC Berkeley as well.
Okay. I went to high school in this boarding school in Malacca. I was there for about 5 years. I spent most of my time preparing for SPM. And then after high school, I went to College UEM, which is placed in the beautiful, not so much of a town, probably a ghost town called Lembah Beringin. And that's where I made most of my long-lasting friends till today. And did my A-levels, my SATs in KY, and then went to the US in 2022. Yeah.
Wow, okay, incredible. How do you feel that maybe that experience inspired you or perhaps influenced the kinds of decisions that you made up until this point, right?
Right. I think that's a very, very good question. I wouldn't say conclude, but I would say that the main reason why I ended up going to the US and probably why most of my friends went to the UK and US was because we were just coexisting in an environment where everybody was kind of aiming towards the same goal. And I think that existing in a community where everyone was pretty collaborative and everyone was working towards the same goal and helping each other out, I think it made the experience less daunting in a sense because these high aiming universities can be quite tough to get into.
I see.
And so being in a community where everybody's trying to go through the nitty-gritty details and strategize together, I think it just makes it much more refreshing, and it's quite a pretty fun experience to go into. And when you get to that final goal, it just becomes much more rewarding.
Wow, okay, interesting. So I guess maybe could you share a little bit about what eventually swayed you towards US education? Because I guess there were a couple of choices that were at hand, right?
Yeah, I mean, the US was never part of the plan till about my first year of A-levels.
Wow. Okay.
I think, so basically the high school that I went to, College Saad, I had a lot of people to look up to in terms of my seniors.
Wow.
And a lot of them went to UK universities because that was just, the tried and tested path. I do acknowledge that it's a very privileged background to come from to be able to say that, but it was just the reality that going to the UK was a tried and tested formula to kind of get you a good job right after graduation.
Right.
And I thought that was a very linear pathway. So after I got the Shell Malaysia scholarship, and then in that contract there was an option to kind of pursue my studies in the US. It kind of opened my doors to more opportunities, and I felt that was something that I wanted to explore. So I definitely looked into the US education much more in depth in my first year of A-levels. And I just resonated with it much more because I was kind of tired of how the Malaysian education system kind of operated.
Yeah.
Not saying that it's bad or anything, but I think the style of working very, very hard for a final exam and making that the determinant of your grade at the end of the day is
and your future
yeah
as well.
Yeah, it becomes a bit old, I would say, and I wanted to try something new.
Yep.
So and I can say that in the past year that I've been in Berkeley, it's much more rewarding when the final grade that you obtain was a combination of all your efforts in the quizzes, and the semester exams, and the mid-years, and
it was everything mattered, no matter how small
exactly.
it was. Well, speaking of resonating then, I mean it definitely resonated with you enough to the point that you literally took point on the largest workshop to essentially encourage Malaysian students to apply to the US.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about that, maybe?
Yeah, it was an opportunity that fell upon me in about March this year. I was a part of USApps, which is essentially a workshop. I think you've much explained to your subscribers, to your listeners, that it's basically like a workshop that wants to assist aspiring Malaysian students who want to study in the US, or perhaps people who never considered it in the first place, to kind of like know more about education in the USA. But that opportunity fell upon me in March this year from last year's core committee member, which was Yashing, and he introduced the idea to me. And I was always a part of USApps as a facilitator in the past year, and I was a attendee in 2020 and 2021. So it's always been something that I was aware of and I was always attracted to. And to be able to be given the opportunity to lead it was something that I was very honored with, and I really wanted to execute it well enough so that the people who go back satisfied and at least know more about education in the US.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I guess what was your kind of like operating thought as you were thinking about how to get people to come to the workshop and also to come to the US? I guess what were some of the things that maybe you thought would really appeal to, I guess, an audience of students? Sometimes they don't even know where they're going to study. They don't even know what they're going to do with their lives. After SPM comes and goes, basically then they are just oh, you know what, I'm just gonna sign up for, I don't know, this program, that program, but maybe they don't really have a longer term vision right there.
Yeah, I mean, okay, that's a very, very good question. That's why the way that we kind of charted the first day and second, so basically USApps this year was a 2-day workshop, and the way that we kind of structured the first day was that it catered much more to an audience that was still discovering what they wanted to do post SPM or post high school, post IGCSEs and all your O levels programs, and we wanted to set them to a path which leads you to be able to apply to the US. And so for people who are still wondering, we had talks about life in the US, because that can still be new to certain people when they don't know anything about studying in the US and what it entails, the dangers, the fun things.
Danger.
Yeah, the danger. I had to start with the danger.
A lot of danger.
I mean, yeah, there's a fair amount of worries, especially amongst the parents and counselors. So before they promote it to their child or to their students, you have to be. I think it's fair to be. Yeah. You have to be pretty real about what you're going to be expecting there, and then we also covered a lot of things regarding pre-university opportunities that would probably be much more strategic for you to go to the US. And
I see.
So the first day was just focused upon people who were still on the fence of whether they wanted to go to the US or not.
I see.
And they wanted to just get much more information. So the second day was much more directed and pivoted to people who already knew or was 90% sure that they wanted to go to the US, but they just wanted to know the nitty-gritty details of how to get there and the best strategies to get there. So the way that we kind of charted, back to your question, was what went through my mind was probably giving them a much more personalized experience or personalized tips that were much more pivoted towards experiences rather than making it very these tips and tricks much more vague. So we were trying to keep it broad in form of discussion, but we were also making the questions a two-way discussion in a sense.
Right.
So
kind of Socratic method. You have questions and answers and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
I guess maybe, you've been in the US for about a year now, and you've just had, an education at, probably the most prestigious public university in the US so far. Would you share a little bit about your experience so far and how you feel that that experience has been shaping your thoughts?
Experience in the US.
Experience in the US, yes.
Would you like me to cover academically, social life?
Well, I guess maybe you can start by talking a little bit about the academics, how are they different maybe compared to what you had in Malaysia.
Okay.
Perhaps.
Yeah, I think I covered a bit of it when I was talking about the introduction about the difference in education experience. But to expand on that, I think it just gave me a very refreshed view of how much autonomy and how much control I have over deciding what I want to learn in school. And I think having the liberty to choose living up to America, as its name, the land of the free. I think the way that they've charted that autonomy to every single student that graces UC Berkeley or any educational institution in the US is that freedom is really something that they live up to. And as vague as it may sound, it is central to a student's experience studying in the US. And
Right.
an example of that would be, even though I'm pursuing a major in economics or a double major in data science, I still get to explore things outside my field. So I've taken a class on ethnic studies where I learn about minority communities in the US, like the Asian Americans or the indigenous communities. And I took a poli-sci class, which was completely irrelevant to my degree or my major in of itself, right? But they value that in a sense where they make it compulsory for you to take 7 what they call breadth courses, where it just kind of makes your experience a much more holistic one, where you're learning things from the arts, from the sciences, biological sciences.
Wow.
And it's something just much more broad that I can learn to appreciate much more. But it's also pivoted in the sense where you're able to control how in-depth you want it to be or how holistic you want it to be as well. Yeah. So yeah, that's just a bit of the educational experience. But in terms of my personal experience, there's just a much more stronger relationship that I have with my teachers or my educators now. In Malaysia, I think probably because it was just high school and all, I didn't really have a one-to-one connection with my professors and my high school teachers, and so education felt a bit linear and education felt a bit dry. But right now, it's much more about what you want to know, interaction, and what I want to know personally, and which kind of fields do I want to get into, right? So
For sure, yeah.
So yeah, I found that pretty refreshing.
That is incredible, yeah. Because like a lot of times, well, people think of learning as just like a one-way process, when actually no, it's not, right? Like it's a thought-out interaction. So then let's get a little bit into like social life as well. Because like of course, well, you are going to be in an environment with like people from all over the world, I'm sure. Like it's not just like people from Malaysia or like people. Maybe you can share a little bit about like I guess your experience of interacting with your classmates, the people in Berkeley, California as well at large.
I think the main word for this is that the US, or at least people in Berkeley that I've experienced, they're very collaborative people. I think people whom which I go to classes with, although we were working towards the same goal, which is essentially, okay, let's say to get an A, for example, right? People are not out to get you. Although it is very competitive and the class is kind of like graded over a curve, so if everyone does well, then that means everyone doesn't do well, right? So, but despite that reality or that fact, people are quite collaborative at the heart of it. And whenever you don't understand a specific concept, people come to assist you with it.
Right.
There are teachers' assistants, there are friends who help you with, and there are also the professors that you can meet during office hours. So I found that pretty nice socially. But beyond the classrooms, I think there's just so much opportunities for you to join clubs and societies.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And at the start of every semester, there's this thing called Kalapalooza. And Kalapalooza is basically like a club fair where every single club on Berkeley, the thousands of them, just convene in a gym hall,
Right.
And they just kind of like promote the clubs and what their objectives are and what the stuff that they kind of do. And I think whether it be pre-professional clubs or whether it be social clubs, there will always be an aspect where they involve fun in it. So they don't make it too professional. They don't make it too much about consulting or too much about tech discovery, for example. There will always be retreats that you go on. There will always be, fun times at the club, or maybe like Taco Tuesdays that you can go to. So yeah, yeah, that's kind of a thing there.
All right, cool. Now this is a question that I would ask out of my kind of personal interest. So like, now you are studying basically in the heart of San Francisco, right? Where essentially, like technologies are essentially rife and being developed on a day-to-day basis. I'm just wondering, but do you have any thoughts about artificial intelligence? You know, like, is it
Yeah.
going to replace us? Are we all going to be, well, shall we say, replaced by robots, perhaps? Will there be a robot Victor interviewing a robot?
I think it's a very very fair question. I'm not very well versed on the topic of AI, but I have been using them for some of my classes, and perhaps like in my most recent internship, I've tried to ask ChatGPT much more pivoted questions, but I still feel like there is a very very long way to go for us to be able to say that AI is going to be able to take over our lives, and I think it is fair to say that humans just have that natural tendency to be able to kind of like communicate in a much more humane and much more emotionally aware manner, which I find very very valuable when it comes to human interaction or perhaps the work that you produce.
Absolutely agree. Yeah, like empathy, being able to on a
those kind of
day-to-day basis.
Yeah, exactly.
Right there. I mean, historically, at the very least, I've always heard that Berkeley is a very social justice oriented campus. And I don't know, like, did you feel that you saw that right there? I mean, like, I would tend to think that, like, you know, the root of social justice to some degree is in, like, you know, empathy to some degree. But of course, maybe I don't want to, like, speak over your experience. Like, did you feel that basically social justice was a theme, like, I guess, like, in your education?
I'm not sure if social justice isn't a theme in other campuses, but it was definitely a theme that I saw pretty prominent in Berkeley. I think in the 2 semesters that I spent in Berkeley, there were 2 main, movements or protests that happened on campus.
Wow.
The first one was a UAW, if I'm not mistaken, it was a UAW protest. So it's basically the teachers' assistants and people helping professors. They were requesting for higher wages because they were basically arguing on the basis that without us, your classes can't operate as usual. So they were asking for like double their wages. So they were actually striking for about the last 2 months of my first semester, and it actually stopped all the final exams from occurring.
Wow.
And the professors basically had to restructure how they wanted to grade their students at the end of the semester.
So like the protest actually created change.
Yeah.
Like social action actually can create change.
Yeah.
Wow.
And they actually won. I think at the start of my spring semester, which was in January, the chancellor actually announced that they were going to revisit the wages for the TAs, and I think they actually managed to increase it to about 40 to 50%.
That's very cool.
And I think that was very, very new to me. Protests in Malaysia take a very, very long time to bring tangible change. But I think the way that Berkeley students and TAs kind of approached it was much more effective. And this kind of created some sort of a culture in Berkeley in of itself. I think last semester, which was in the spring, there was also a protest regarding the closure of a library. It was for an anthropology library because it wasn't garnering enough revenue for it to be sustainable. So they wanted to close the library, and people were very, very unhappy with it. So they resorted to sleeping in the libraries to make sure that the authorities weren't able to close those libraries. So people go through really, really far measures to kind of
in order to make things happen.
Yeah, man. But it's nice to see that these social justice movements are actually bringing tangible change in themselves.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, amazing.
So it's very admirable.
Yeah. And speaking of which, right, I am curious. So like, of course, when we think about change in a society and a lot of other things, right? So there can be like a lot of different things, right? But I'd like you to just imagine with me for a moment that you have full authority to basically change any aspect of our society without restriction, no borders, nothing but what would you choose to change if you were basically allowed to make that change?
In Malaysia or anywhere?
Well, it could be anywhere.
Okay. Give me a couple of seconds to think about it.
Sure.
I feel like I have a lot of things that I'm passionate about when it comes to bringing social justice, or as the buzzword they call it today, reformasi or whatever.
Reformasi.
Malaysia Madani, you are. But
shout out Anwar, bro.
yeah, I have a a very strong passion towards education equality and equity in other sense, because I think it relates a lot to social mobility in Malaysia and access to tertiary education and access to quality education, whether that be in the form of public universities, matrix, polytechnic universities. I think those opportunities should not be limited via a specific race quota. And although I understand that there are limitations towards eradicating that as a whole, but I hope that there will, if I was a leader in a position of power, I would definitely find ways to kind of like find a transitionary step towards kind of like slowly getting that out of our system, and perhaps give opportunities to students who achieve like, respectable merits to qualify to those universities from whatever race or religion they were born into or what they believe in. I don't think that they should be limited to educational opportunities to, alleviate their families from the current status quo, and I'd really like to see that, because once we make that big step, I think we'd be able to make much more progressive steps towards other components of the economy.
You spoke a little bit earlier on about like equity versus equality.
Yeah.
Can you share, I guess, like what you understand about
Yeah, I mean,
in the Malaysian context, maybe?
I think that equity is the better word, because every race has every right to get it equally. But I get that in status quo in Malaysia, that's very hard to achieve because of our long-standing, what do you say? Want to say traditions or whatever's written in the Perlembagaan Malaysia or whatever. But
Sure.
if we were to make that transition, I think equity has to come towards those Malays that come from underprivileged communities first. So, and that can be easily solved with needs-based quota rather than race-based quota. I have nothing against alleviating Malays within underprivileged communities, because I know that they are very, very deservedly of that. But I resonate to kind of giving those opportunities to Chinese and Indians and other marginalized communities who are of those similar social and like economic statuses as well, to be given those opportunities. And I don't think that they should be deprived of those opportunities just because they come from a particular race or religion.
Okay, incredible. Okay.
So it's a bit of a, I just like to rehash that it is a very sensitive issue, and I know that not a lot of people talk about it, but I think once we kind of like revisit this topic more often and kind of like realize that there are certain merits to these arguments, I think we can really have a really constructive debate or constructive discussion about how to move forward. And then I really am passionate about it, but I know that it takes much more than one person to be able, even if I was in a position of leadership, as you mentioned, right, the top, like if I had like universal power, for example, right? I still think it takes much more than a single individual to kind of like solve that problem. People have to buy into that idea. Right. I have to believe in it as well.
What was it that they said again? It's something like, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, then go together.
Yeah.
Or something like that. I respect that. Okay. Then I guess like, well, to end this interview then, well, do you have any particular hopes and dreams for like your own life, like as you see it within the context of like Malaysia, your work at Shell, or anything else?
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, Shell is definitely going to be there in the short term. Perhaps even in the long term, if I'm really passionate about doing my work within the energy industry.
Right.
But
because you're going to be there as a scholar for like however many years, and
yeah, I'll be there for 5 years serving my bond.
Right on.
But even within those 5 years, I don't see myself achieving, to the depths of corporate goals, kind of like for the sole purpose of profits or for making your charts look very nice or something, right? My personal goal or broad aim is to return back to public service and kind of like, share my expertise in the form of policy making, advising ministers, advising public servants to, chart Malaysia in the right direction, whether that be in the energy industry or whatever industry that I'll be experiencing in the future.
Right.
So that is my personal goal. Yeah.
Incredible. Okay. Random question. Do you feel that Malaysia can eventually one day go ahead of Singapore?
Singapore. I understand that we always make that our benchmark, and it's fair because they're a neighboring country. But I think it's fair to be realistic that we are quite far away from what Singapore has achieved. But I don't deny that they also have inherent issues that they have to solve themselves as well.
You have a thought maybe on how we could move in the direction of, well, not necessarily beating Singapore,
Yeah.
at the very least learning from Singapore, or like the
Yeah.
experience of maybe like, building the nation up to become the very best version of itself that it
Yeah.
can be. I mean, like, it's fair to say also that, like, comparison is the thief of joy, right? And yeah, but I mean, it doesn't stop us from maybe taking steps in the right direction
Correct.
as well.
Yeah, and Singapore has taken steps into the right direction in various areas that
Many
we
areas.
can definitely look up to.
Yeah.
And the benefit of being a neighboring nation is that we share quite similar cultural backgrounds in and of itself, and there are people that we know, and there are certain connections that we can make, fill up the gaps where Malaysia has not fulfilled yet. But I think Malaysia is taking a very reasonable, tangible steps forward. Not just comparing ourselves to Singapore, but comparing ourselves to other developing nations around us as well. I noticed that in the Economy Madani framework that Anwar just released, he wanted to make Malaysia like a not necessarily a free economy, robust, but he talked about raising the ceiling, but also about raising the floor. And I think this is an essential factor, or something that I really commend about that framework, because we can see that in the United States, right? Like, there's so much capital to go around, and there are these huge companies, but there are also a lot of inherent issues like homelessness, people who don't have homes, there's a housing issue where people can't afford homes because the economy is just going too robust, and housing prices are just skyrocketing, flying through the roofs. And Medicare and Social Security is not doing
If you break a leg in America, you're gonna
not
pay your
doing
bank
enough
account.
things, right? Exactly. So I think Malaysia, as a developing nation who has hindsight of these experiences in the US, they took a wrong turn, and it's very hard for them to kind of turn back. I think it's important for Malaysia to kind of like learn from those issues and kind of solve it.
Right.
Whatever
like,
they
pay
can.
attention to
Yeah.
history and like what had worked as we kind of like move forward somehow or another. Are you optimistic that we can do so in like even the political climate that we have, or do you feel that that there are some things that we have to work around?
Yeah, I think the change of government in 2016 showed us that although we are a young democracy, we're quite a mature democracy, that there was a smooth transition to power. So in terms of political maturity, there is still things that can be worked upon, but I don't deny that we can go into step into the right direction with the right leadership, with the right policies in place. Not saying this vaguely, I think that there's still a pretty much long way to go when it comes to social justice and change and political maturity to kind of like appreciate the voices of the people, right? There is still a lot of things that can be improved.
For sure. Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. Thank you so much for this interview.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.